Podcast City Network.
This is Final Score, your number one podcast for sports news. Here are your hosts, Chris and Craig.
Hey everybody, it's Craig with Final Score, Podcast City Network, and my guest today is with the Foul Ball Area podcast. Matt with the Foul Ball Area, how are you doing today, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here. I've been following you guys for a little bit, and I like the stuff that you guys are putting out, so I'm honored to be a guest.
Awesome, thanks. Well, let's talk a little bit about Foul Ball Area podcast for those of the guests that aren't familiar with you just yet.
Yeah, so it's a completely baseball-focused podcast, or baseball lifestyle, I like to call it, because we do talk about other things around the game of baseball, but we don't really focus on any other sports besides baseball. That's my favorite sport for my entire life, so that's what I want to talk about, what I want to write about. So completely baseball and baseball lifestyle focused, and I've been doing it for a little over 3 years now. I started it when I was a sophomore in college. I just wanted to get a little bit more experience with hosting a show. I did some college radio when I was a student, but I wanted a little more experience doing my own thing. So I was like, I'm just going to go for it, start my own thing, and see how it goes. And now I've been doing it for about 3 years, kind of on and off for a little bit, but really getting into it now is trying to build it back up and get something going.
That's awesome. I've seen a couple of the blog posts you guys have talking about like ballpark lifestyle and different, beers and stuff and all that. So that's awesome. But so how did you get into sports pod? I know you did a little bit of background in college, but kind of what made you go, let's do our own podcast and let's take this and run with it?
I think it was when I was a sophomore in college. I had tried to get some other opportunities, applying for internships and stuff, and didn't get the internships I'd hoped for. And so, I really had always wanted to host a talk show or be a broadcaster, something along that line. And so I knew that podcasting has become a really big thing, and it's pretty easy to start your own. So I was like, all right, I love baseball. I want the experience. I've bought a microphone, got SoundCloud. I'm going to go for it. And I used Adobe Audition because I had that through Virginia Tech, through my school. So I was like, I'm set. I'm ready to go. And I just started cranking them out. My first episode I did was actually like right before the MLB season started. It was just a season preview. And I think I sat down one Sunday afternoon and all in one day recorded it, edited it, posted it on SoundCloud, and shared it on social media. Now my process is a little more refined, takes a little more time, but that's how I did the first one and started getting some traction. And I was like, all right, we're rolling with it.
That's awesome. I know that's a lot of work in one day to be able to record, edit, and then post. I know, as you said, the process change. As you get better, you start learning more things. It takes a little bit longer to get the way you want it.
Yeah. I definitely changed from that process to now. I'll kind of plan things out, make a little rundown of what I want to talk about, share it with my co-host, try to book a guest each episode so we have someone's voice other than just the two of us and another perspective on what we're talking about that day. Always try to come up with an interesting topic. And we usually have some different segments that we'll do every episode that we do. Like we'll do a Hall of Fame case evaluation for certain players, stuff like that. We try to have segments so our listeners can know what to look forward to in each episode.
Awesome. And I see your co-host, Trey Lyle, joins you as well. And I guess how'd you guys decide to do it together? Did you get started and he joined in, or did you guys just decide together, hey, let's do this baseball podcast?
Yeah, so we were classmates at Virginia Tech together. And so I did my first episode, just myself. And I think it was about half an hour. And I was thinking, people might get a little annoyed just listening to me talk by myself for half an hour. That might be kind of boring. And so we were classmates. And one day in class, I was talking to him. I was like, yeah, I started this podcast. Do you want to join me the next episode I do? And, make it a little more interesting. And so he did. And so I've always said he's my unofficial official co-host. So he's been there for most of the episodes so far.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so I guess you kind of talked about you're bringing on guests and being kind of involved in the baseball world as you are now. I guess who's been your favorite guest or maybe the most interesting guest you've had so far?
That's an interesting question. I've had some pretty cool guests. One year at school, I was part of a student sports media club, and one year at school, I think it was the weekend that Clemson and Virginia Tech were playing a football game, and College Game Day came to Blacksburg, and we had Reese Davis come speak to us as a group. And during his speaking, he told us that he was a baseball fan. And so after that, there was a little Q&A session, and then people were going up talking to him. And so I went up to him. I said, "Hey, I heard you say you're a baseball fan. I have this baseball podcast. Could I just take like 5 minutes of your time and talk to you?" And right then and there, he was gracious enough to do it. I had my recorder with me. It was just a little handheld recorder. So I did a quick interview with Reese Davis. So that was pretty cool having him on there. Recently, I had a writer from the Taiwan Times talking about the Chinese Professional Baseball League. So that was a fun interview. We're a 12-hour time difference, so I had to get up at 5 a.m. to do that interview. But that
Wow.
was fun, and he had some good insight on the league. And I also had Aaron Fitt of D1Baseball.com join me recently to talk about the changing landscape of college baseball. So those 3 interviews were all really cool to do.
That's awesome. Some of those interviews, it just the opportunity that we have now. You meant podcasting, the fact that we can do this and don't have to be involved with radio as much anymore. You can literally just pick up. We were talking before we started this segment that you just we pick up a microphone and here we go. Let's do this. So it's really interesting, and you get to meet all these different people. So that's awesome. And having Reese Davis is a big feather in the cap. So congrats
Yeah.
on that. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's so easy these days, with the rise of social media and how big that is, just to reach out to someone and say, "Hey, I love, the content that you put out. You've got a great perspective on things, and just, would you like to join me sometime?" It's so easy to reach out to people. Social media has made that a lot easier, a lot more access.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into what we're going to talk about today. Well, the best news is that baseball is coming back, and players are going to be reporting to, I guess, a new spring training July 1st. So the big question on everyone's mind is not as far as how they finally got this going, but how long will they be able to play before COVID kind of rears its ugly head? But I guess, how happy are you that baseball's finally coming back? They were airing their dirty laundry all over the media, but how happy are you that baseball's finally returning?
I'm really excited. There was a period there where I did not think we were going to have a Major League Baseball season. I thought that both sides were just wasting this opportunity to get back onto the field. And I was really disappointed, really pessimistic, because every time that the players made an offer or the league made an offer, the other side would counter. It was just huge back and forth between the two sides for a long time. Didn't seem like either side was willing to compromise at all. They weren't making any progress. So I really thought that there was not going to be a season this year. And then, especially when Rob Manfred came out and said he wasn't confident that there would be a season, I'm like, he's the commissioner. He has the power to implement a season, and he's saying he's not confident. That just really, I think everyone was really pessimistic after that, thinking there wasn't going to be a season. And then a few weeks ago, or just last week, everything started coming together. It was a little slow, but it was like, all right, the players might accept this proposal. And then everything just kind of started happening, rolling slowly together. And then finally MLB said, all right, 60-game season, report July 1st. We're starting this on July 23rd, 24th. I was really excited when that came out, because I can't imagine a summer without baseball. I put out a blog post about that last week, how to spend a summer without baseball. And there are some fun activities to do. I like hiking and hanging out by the lake, but I love watching baseball too. So I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's one of the favorite things I do. Living here in Florida, like, I get the chance. I'm a Tigers fan, so
Okay.
I go to Lakeland every year, go to see some spring training. But there's a lot of baseball down here, and that's one of my favorite things to do in the summertime. Is just be at a game and experience it, and just hearing the crack of the bat and everything that goes with a baseball game in the summer. Is just there's nothing like it. But
No, there's not. Yeah.
so
So
so some of the things that they came out with in talking about, now it's going to be a 60-game season. They're using a universal DH along with a few other things. How do you think the 60-game season is going to affect, let's say, like some of those teams that might have been either middle of the road teams or lower? Do you think that they're going to have? Do we think we're going to see any big surprises out of the 60-game season of teams making the playoffs?
I think we could. I think that it could really go either way, because you look at a team like the Washington Nationals last year, they wouldn't have made the playoffs in a 60-game season. So, with a regular 162-game season, you have a real idea of how good a team is going to be. 60 games, a shorter stretch, more of a sprint than a season. Anything can really happen, and every game matters. So you might get a team that's really hot for those 60 games, but if they were playing a long regular season, they wouldn't have been as good in the long run. So I think it could really go either way. But for a team like the Nationals last year, this wouldn't be good for them. But for a team that can put together a little bit of a hot streak here and there, this would be good for them. And only 60 games, so there's not as much time to drop off once they get started. But also, every game does matter more, so you have to take every game as extremely important and make sure you win every game.
I know on the last episode that you guys put out talking about, a draft recap with Corey Van Dyke on your podcast, and you guys were talking about the positives versus negatives of having 60 games. I know baseball enthusiasts, 60 games is not ideal, but it's baseball at least. Do you think the 60-game season might, for the general, maybe the casual fan, might draw them in a little bit more because those games are that much important and literally every single game counts?
I think it could, because I think that's a criticism you hear about baseball a lot, is it's such a long season. You lose a couple games here and there. It doesn't really matter in the long run, but a 60-game season, every game matters that much more. Every game is so important, and it's going to be really exciting because we're going to have, usually we look at the second half of the season and we're like, all right, now it's time to watch the division races, the wild card races. Things are getting exciting. It's heating up, but we're starting at that point this season. So we're starting where things are already exciting, where it's time to watch the playoff races and everything's heating up. So I think it's going to be a lot more exciting in a 60-game season than it would in a regular long season. So I think it could draw in some more casual fans because it's like, it's more of a sprint. Like I said, it's going to be more exciting. Every game just means that much more. So I think a lot of casual fans should probably be tuning in, watching more of these games.
How do you feel about the universal DH? I know it's different because it's traditional National League. You've got the pitcher goes in and steps up to bat, but do you think it might help because pitchers nowadays are they're very, like, I wouldn't say coddled, but they're protected because you got guys that are pitch counts. Look at Shohei Ohtani. He's basically on inning limits a lot of times. Do you think this might help in the long run of the game? I know it was kind of inevitable, but do you think this might help in the long run of the game, having a universal DH on both sides?
I think it could help, but I'm not a fan of it. I don't like to say that I'm a baseball purist, but I'm pretty close. And so I don't like the designated hitter rule in the American League. And so I didn't want it to come to the National League either. I like having the pitchers go up to the plate. Guys like Madison Bumgarner, Steven Strasburg, they're good hitters, even though they're pitchers. We'll miss out on Bartolo Colon moments, even though he's not a good hitter, but the one home run that he had, it was exciting. So we'll miss out on those great moments. It does take away from some of the strategy of the game. So I don't like it. I know that it is something that a lot of people have been wanting to implement for a long time. And so it did almost feel kind of inevitable, like it was going to happen eventually. And this year was just the perfect time for them to implement it because they just needed, they needed to get an agreement together. And if that's part of the agreement, then yeah, put it in there. And so this was just the perfect time for them to do it. And it was going to happen eventually.
Yeah, I think I go back and forth about it because you see this, the stories of guys that maybe were great hitters in college or high school, and they haven't hit really at all once they get to the major leagues. And now, now we're not going to have that opportunity. So I see both sides of it myself. It might be a little bit more exciting to the casual fan where you have But the strategy now, that's going to hurt a lot of teams in the National League who weren't planning for this universal DH. And now all of a sudden you got to have one. So some of the teams that are not as deep, maybe like the Dodgers might be fine because they've got like one of the deepest benches I've seen in a while. But I guess, how do you think that'll affect other teams that weren't preparing for that? Maybe like the Braves or something.
Well, I think the Braves are actually going to be fine too. They've got a couple of minor league players that are almost ready for the major leagues. So they've got some guys that I think they can insert into the lineup and they'll be fine for this year. But yeah, a lot of the teams in the National League that weren't planning for this extra bat in their lineup, now they have to find someone to fill that spot. And so maybe they have to call someone up from the minors. Maybe they have to pull someone off their bench who's not the best hitter and put them as a DH in the lineup every day. And so they are at a disadvantage when it comes to that. I just sent out a tweet a few minutes ago saying, someone please sign Yasiel Puig. He would be a great addition. He's still a free agent. I don't know how a National League team hasn't signed him yet because he would be a great DH.
I don't know either. And that's actually one thing. I'm glad you mentioned that because I got to get your opinion. Why do you think Yasiel Puig's not signed yet? Do you think it's more the off the field stuff that has been kind of surrounding him, or why do you think he's not signed yet?
I think that could be it. I don't think he's ever really developed into the player that he was kind of hyped up to be when he came up with the Dodgers, but also his attitude. A lot of people criticize him for the attitude that he has. So I do think that could definitely be a big part of it. Maybe they have some projections for him that show him really not producing at the level that they would hope from him. But I do think he is a solid everyday batter. And I think that he would be a great addition to any National League team that's looking for a designated hitter. So I'm really surprised that no one signed him yet. I know last week there were reports that the Giants were going to be maybe thinking about signing him, but no news yet. And so I don't know how long he'll be a free agent, but I would have to imagine that someone would pick him up before the season starts.
I mean, you can never have too many powerful bats in your lineup, and especially if it's a National League team and they have to have a universal DH now. He's not a bad outfielder himself by any stretch of the means, but I mean, I'd be surprised if he goes into spring training or at least into the beginning of the season and not signed. There's plenty of teams that could definitely use him for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And he is a solid outfielder too, like you said. So he could fill both those spots, an outfield spot or a DH, wherever they need him.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what teams. I would think that a contending team will probably want to take the chance on him because, I mean, rings are so hard to come by in Major League Baseball. You got to have the marathon of your season, even in this case, a sprint, but you still got to go through the playoffs and 7-game series against some of the best teams in baseball. So, yeah, any bat will help you out for sure. But
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, even if they sign him for just a 1-year deal this year, that's something. I don't know if they're going to keep the universal DH next year, but they have it this year. So even if it's just a 1-year deal, someone's got to pick him up.
Yeah, I think the risk is worth taking for sure. So speaking of the 2020 season, and we're doing the 60 games, the thing that I've honestly been thinking about a lot the last couple of days, and I want to get your take on this, is that it's not about the baseball's finally going to start. Yes, it's finally going to start, thank God. But the question is going to be, how long does it take before, like I said, COVID rears its ugly head? Do you think that in Major League Baseball will be able to make it through the complete season, 60 games and the playoffs, because they are still traveling? They're not in a bubble like other sports, but they are traveling even without fans. Do you think the MLB is going to make it through this whole season as unscathed as possible?
Yeah, so they're traveling and they're doing a regional schedule. So like the AL East teams are playing in their division and then playing the NL East teams. So they're still keeping things regional, but they are traveling. So that'll be an issue. I don't know, man. It's going to be tough because the night that they announced baseball was back, a couple of Rockies players had tested positive for coronavirus that night. So it's like we get good news, baseball's back, and then, oh, we still have coronavirus to deal with. So I don't know if they'll make it the whole season. I think I'm really kind of worried about once we get into September and October and the playoffs roll around. That's what I'm really worried about when we get back into the colder months, the months that are typically cold and flu season, and then having coronavirus on top of that. That's what I'm worried about. But I mean, you have people that they see this news that athletes test positive and they're like, oh, that's inevitable. It's going to happen. And I'm kind of like, but it doesn't have to happen. Like,
Right.
yes, I'm glad that baseball's back, but if there is this much risk, then maybe it would be best to hold off for a year. I would be all right with the baseball season being canceled if it's due to a pandemic
Mm.
instead of the labor negotiations. I'm glad they got the labor negotiations settled out, but if we still can't have the season due to a global pandemic, I completely understand that.
Yeah, and I've been a proponent of that too, with baseball and just every. They got a lot of things to work out right now, and hopefully they do for the sake of all of us baseball fans. But I've been on the board with a bunch of the sports to just let's get through this thing together. Yes, sports are important to us, but they're not more important than our own health. And
Exactly.
so yeah, I would be on board with that as well. Obviously, I'd love to have a full baseball season, but hey, if they can get it done right, I guess there's no reason not to have some sports at least.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're taking a lot of precautions. There'll be a lot of testing, they are going to isolate the players as much as possible. So they are being proactive and taking a lot of precautions, but it is still a very risky situation.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to the MLB draft. So I know you did. It was a couple weeks ago. They did it very differently than they normally do. They usually have more than 5 rounds, but they cut it down to 5 rounds. And you put out a blog covering the first round analysis for everything. And I know as a Tigers fan, it was a bad season, but we're happy. We got our guy. We got Spencer Torkelson from Arizona State. And I guess out of that draft, what was your initial thoughts about how they handled the draft and maybe in how they cut it down from down to 5 rounds?
I think 5 rounds was just way too short. I mean, you go from 40 to 5, and that leaves so many players that had expected to be drafted, that had expected to be on in a major league farm system by this time, and now that dream of theirs is crushed because Major League Baseball decided to save a bunch of money by cutting it down, by cutting 35 rounds out of their draft. I mean,
That's
you
insane.
can't
That's
even
insane.
you can't even compare it to like the NFL draft because there's 7 rounds in a normal NFL draft. There's 40 in a normal Major League Baseball draft. So it's not even comparable between the two sports. So I mean, that's just so many players that have that opportunity taken away from them, and it's really sad. It's heartbreaking for them. They could still sign as undrafted free agents, but even then, their signing bonuses are way less than they would be had they been taken in the draft or in a normal year had they been an undrafted free agent. So it's a really tough situation for those players that had expected to be drafted, and then they find out that it's cut down to 5 rounds. I feel for those guys, and it's a tough year for the MLB draft.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they handle. I imagine they'll go back to the normal way they do it next year for that draft. But yeah, I would imagine though that we've seen a lot of people even leading up to the draft. A lot of players maybe in high school or in college withdraw their name because it's only 5 rounds. I might have gone in like the 10th or 12th round. Now I might not even get drafted, so they decide to go back to school or go to college instead. I would imagine that's probably going to be very good for college baseball. No.
Yeah, I would think it would. I think college baseball does have some issues coming its way with granting spring athletes an extra year of eligibility. So they have a lot of players returning next year, and then they'll have all the incoming freshmen still. So with the limited scholarships that college baseball has, and now an influx of players, there will be some issues. But I think that the quality of the game will be a lot better with those seniors staying for another year, and with uh, high school players that could have been drafted coming to college instead of going to the draft. I think the quality of college baseball will definitely be improved next year, but there will be some tough situations if teams have a big freshman class incoming and then have a couple of seniors stay an extra year. That'll be a tough situation. I'm sure players will be upset about playing time. It'll be tough to decide where the scholarships go because, I mean, that's a whole nother issue that I don't know that much about, but there are plenty of people out there that are big advocates of getting more scholarships in college baseball. It is kind of insane that they have so few scholarships for as many players as they have on a team, but definitely going to be some tough situations and tough decisions to be made around the college baseball world next year.
Absolutely. Well, you broke down the first round of that MLB draft for the guys that did get drafted. And I guess as a whole, maybe not necessarily in just the first round, but as a whole, who do you think maybe had the best draft, kind of filled all the holes they needed, and who had a lot left to be desired? Who do you think may have struggled in the draft, not addressing their needs?
Well, I think I think the Tigers had a good draft, especially. I mean, they could have just won the draft with their first round pick and Spencer Torkelson, and they've got a really good farm system building up. I'm sure you're happy about that with
Yeah.
Casey Mize and a couple of other young pitchers coming up, and now Spencer Torkelson. He's going to be a great player. It was interesting that they drafted him as a third baseman instead of a first baseman. I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning was there. I thought maybe they expect him to come up while Miguel Cabrera is still there, and so they'd put him at third, keep Cabrera at first. I don't know if that's their line of thinking. That's what I thought. But I think he's a great player, so they definitely got a great pick and could have won the draft just with him alone. I was really surprised by the Orioles pick at number 2. A lot of people thought they would have gone with Martin. They ended up picking Heston Kjerstad, so that was a very interesting pick. But they had a good draft last year. They got Adley Rutschman out of Oregon State. So the Orioles were good last year in the draft. Really surprising pick this season. I have to be honest, the rounds 2 through 5, the MLB draft is hard to follow because there's so many players from all over the country, high school players that I've never heard of. So it is tough to follow, but I know just from the first round, I know the Tigers had a great draft. They had a pretty good weekend. The Orioles were really surprising. The Rockies ended up getting Zach Veen at pick number 9, which is really surprising that he fell that far because I know he was a really highly rated prospect, and a lot of people had him going in the top 5. He fell all the way to 9, which is still great to be picked in the top 10. But when you're expected in the top 5 and then a couple teams pass on you, the Rockies really got a good pick there.
Absolutely. Yeah, they mentioned Al Avila was talking, being interviewed on draft night, and they asked him specifically about that. And I guess they feel that he's athletic enough to play third base, and he can make those throws. And I mean, they really want him for his bat, obviously, and they must. And like I said, in the farm system, we've got a lot of guys, hopefully, that can make the roster coming up. I would really be intrigued to see some of those guys to come up even on this shortened season. Maybe they start making an appearance. But yeah, I guess they decided that he can play first or third, and they just classified him as a third baseman. I kind of thought that was weird too, but I guess they think he's going to play with Miguel being up on the big league roster also. So that'll be really interesting. But yeah, number 2 was a really questionable one, like really head scratcher there. Like I guess they wanted to just go. They felt that was their guy, and I think that's the big thing with baseball is that they kind of hone in on some of their guys, and they're just going to go after them regardless of where they're picking.
Yeah, and Heston Kjerstad's not a bad pick. He's a great player, but it was just surprising because pretty much every mock draft that I saw had the top 3 picks as the same guys, and then the Orioles and the Marlins end up surprising everybody with their picks. They didn't pick the guys that they were, supposed to. So it was really surprising those second and third picks, but I think the Orioles got a great player in Kjerstad. It's just not the guy everyone thought they were going to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And who do you think didn't really address? I know you said some of the better picks. Who do you think didn't address the needs they had to address?
To be honest, I didn't really follow the secondary that much. And like I said, the MLB draft has always been one of the tougher ones for me to follow, even though it is my favorite sport. It's just such a wide pool of players to choose from.
You get a lot of guys from high school and stuff too that most don't really know.
Yeah, that really makes it tough to follow. So, that's why I read stuff like Baseball America, D1 Baseball, because they have those guys that are out there following those, that's their year-round job is to pretty much predict who's going to be in the draft, look at high school players. But, yeah, I don't know which teams didn't really address their needs, but I know the first round was an exciting night. It was fun to watch. It was good to have some kind of baseball content back that night.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad that the MLB kind of changed. I think it was a couple of years ago. They kind of shifted it to try to make it a little bit more of a better presentation, kind of how the other sports do it, like the MLB or the NBA draft, the NFL draft. I'm really glad they did that because they put it on ESPN. They gave it a primetime slot. And hopefully that brings a little bit more maybe the casual fan that's kind of checking things out, and hopefully they'll, that'll entice them to want to follow along with some of these players from their favorite teams or their closest teams. So
Yeah,
I like that.
I'm really glad they put it on ESPN this year because I don't think it's been on there in recent years. It's been on MLB Network, and I actually don't get MLB Network, so I'm really glad it was on ESPN and I was able to watch because it was an entertaining night.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on to something specifically about your podcast. And I saw over the last couple of weeks, you guys talked about on your last episode, you're doing the best seasons bracket, where you take the best season from every MLB team and pit them in essentially an NCAA style tournament, and to find out who the fans vote who do you think had the best season ever. And I got to admit, I was looking at your bracket today. I'm looking at it right now. I don't know how you guys narrowed down some of the teams you did, because there's some really good ones out there. How do you narrow down, teams like, I know on your podcast you talked about the Giants, because Corey Van Dyke's a Giants fan.
Yeah.
And how you narrowed down to one Giants team. I guess, what kind of criteria did you guys go in? I know you and Trey have different sites about what that was all about.
Yeah, so we started this whole thing as just a blog series where we went through and wrote a post on each team and their best season in franchise history. So I did the National League teams and Trey did the American League teams. And my thought process, my criteria is, I'm just looking at the best product on the field. So championships don't necessarily matter to me because I think that playoffs can always be very random. It's more of whoever's hot at that moment, not necessarily the best team. And, a 7-game playoff series, that's a really small sample size when you have 162 games to look at for the whole season. So I'm looking at the team's, winning percentage that season, the all-stars that they had, the, awards voting that they had, their stats compared to all the other teams in the league that year. That's the kind of stuff I was looking at. And so for each team, I'd just go on their baseball reference page. I'd look at their seasons with the most wins. I'd look at the all-stars they had each season, stuff like that. And that's how we narrowed it down. So it was a little bit of work, a little bit of research. Trey's thought process, he thought that, championships do matter. The best team wins the championship at the end of the year. So I think most of the teams that he picked were teams that won the World Series that season. If they have a World Series, of course, there's teams like the Mariners, the Rangers that have never won a World Series. But for the most part, he went with teams that had won the World Series. Even for the Astros, he chose the 2017 Astros, even with the cheating scandal, because that's their only World Series championship. We had a little debate about this on the last episode. I said I would have gone with the 2019 Astros because they had more wins. There was no evidence of cheating in 2019. So that's the team I would have gone with against the 2017 Astros. But yeah, so we did a blog post about each team and then took all of those and put them together in the bracket. The seeding was kind of random. I had, a couple teams that I was like, all right, this is definitely the number one seed, like the 27 Yankees, widely considered as one of the greatest teams of all time. So they were obviously the number one seed. The 75 Reds, another great team. They're the number one seed for the National League. So the seeding was kind of random, but with a little bit of, a little bit of process here and there.
Awesome. Yeah, I know, like with the Tigers in general, you have the 84 Tigers in there, which that's our last championship. But, even some other teams like that we had, I forget, you guys talked about it on the podcast, the year that they played the Giants. I think it was 2012. With the Tigers and the Giants, when we were, the Tigers were favored and then the Giants came out and just destroyed them. But even teams like that, you could argue some of the best teams. So yeah, I do not envy you trying to narrow down all of those teams and put them in a field, but nonetheless, we have them and you guys have gone through the first round. So now you have round 2. And I believe you guys are doing every couple days. You're narrowing down the field.
2 days per round. Yep.
Okay. So the voting for that would be, today is Sunday, the 28th. So I guess today would be the last day of the voting for the second round, correct?
Yes. Yep.
So we're going to narrow it down to the Elite 8.
Yeah.
So I guess what teams do you think might the fans go as far as best teams? I know the 27 Yankees and the 75 Reds are probably up there.
Yeah. So actually looking at the second round matchups, the 84 Tigers are the Tigers team that are in the bracket, but they've got a tough matchup there against the 2001 Mariners, which I guess for that, you got to look at what do you value, the regular season or the playoffs.
Mhm.
That's what you'd have to look at in that matchup. But I think, some of the best teams are a lot of recent teams, like the 2018 Red Sox. They were one of the best teams in history. The 2019 Dodgers, even though they lost in the first round of the playoffs, they were a fantastic team, in my opinion. So I think those are teams that some fans will go for. You got the 2016 Cubs in there. You got to have them in there if for nothing else, bringing a championship to Chicago after 108
Yeah.
years. So I think that's a team that a lot of fans will probably vote for. But the Yankees and the Reds, they're going to be the teams to beat, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, you see I got my my little custom Cubs jersey up here. I've been following them quite a bit. My roommate was a big Cubs fan. But it's a lot of fun. It was great to see that happen too. The Cubs finally getting a World Series ring in 2016. But so I guess where can people find to vote for the best seasons bracket?
So they can find it on our website, foulballarea.com. It's under the blog page. And then once you get to the blog page, if you need to find it from there, click on the best seasons category and it'll be under there. We'll have each round will be a new post and a new set of voting.
Awesome. And just your content in general, Foul Ball Area. Let's let the fans know where they can find your podcast and when to expect them new episodes.
So our podcasts are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean. We usually come out with a new episode every Wednesday. Sometimes we'll put out an episode on Fridays as well. If we have a special guest that week, we'll do an episode on Friday as well. But usually every Wednesday, you can find our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean. We're very active on social media, on Twitter at Foul Ball Area and Facebook as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate you coming on. I know we kind of pushed this together a little bit over the last couple of weeks. It's been great. I just enjoy being able to talk baseball with somebody else, because Chris, my co-host, he's more of a football guy. He's not too big into baseball. He's a Red Sox fan too, which I don't hold it against him. Don't hold it against him. But Matt, I really appreciate you joining the show, and thank you so much. You're more than welcome to come back and talk baseball anytime. I'd love to have you on again, and appreciate you joining. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Podcast City Network.